Funny thing about looking back, it always feels clearer than when you were living it. At the time, you're too busy being in it. Running, building, fixing things that don't even look broken until years later. You don't pause to question the smiles or the silences. You just assume everything's fine because no one's crying and dinner's still on the table. That's how it was for me. For us. My name's Roberto. I'm 33 years old. I used to be a husband. Still am, I guess, on paper. But the man I was when I said, I do. That guy? He's not around anymore. He left sometime after the lies, but before the lawyers. Maybe he packed up and left the night I found out. Or maybe he stuck around for a while, holding on like a fool, hoping it was just a nightmare I'd wake up from. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's go back to where it all started, back when life felt like something we built, not something that could be stolen. I met Mandy when I was 26. She was 22, working part-time at the town library while studying business administration at the community college. I had just bought a rundown food truck with the last of my savings, and a loan from a guy named Sal who only ever used cash and had a cigar glued to his hand like it was an extra finger. No interest, he said, just don't screw it up. The first time I saw Mandy, it was one of those sticky, hot spring days. My truck's fan was broken, I was running low on propane, and the health inspector had just left me a warning about the storage temp of my cheese. And then there she was. Jeans, ponytail, a backpack slung over one shoulder. Standing in line like she didn't have anywhere else to be. She ordered 2 carne asada tacos and a lemonade. Then she looked at me and said, "You always this serious? Or is that just part of the brand?" Caught me off guard. I managed a half smile and muttered something about being tired. She grinned, shook her head and said, "Well, the tacos are great. You should smile more. People like smiling chefs." And just like that, she left. I didn't know it yet, but that was the moment. The moment life began tilting in her direction. She came back the next week. Then again the week after. Started bringing her laptop, studying at one of the folding tables I kept near the truck. Said the smell of onions and grilled meat helped her focus. I didn't ask questions. I just started keeping an extra lemonade in the cooler. One day, I was trying to sort out a supplier invoice that didn't make sense. I'm not a paperwork guy, never have been, and she looked over and said, "You know this number's wrong, right? They double billed you for produce." I blinked. "You sure?" She nodded. "Positive." That's how it started. She began helping with the books, then inventory, then scheduling. I never asked her to. She just showed up, noticed things, made them better. A few months in, I found myself watching her more than the grill. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was focused. The way she cracked her knuckles when she was thinking. The way she laughed. Loud and unbothered. When I burned a whole tray of tortillas and cursed in Spanish like it was the end of the world. I asked her out 6 months after that first taco. She said yes. We dated for a year, moved in together, and saved every dime we had. I worked the truck. She worked part-time at a diner and still did the books for me at night. We made our own coffee, packed lunches, skipped weekends out so we could meet with landlords and suppliers. And finally, after grinding for what felt like forever, we opened our first sit-down restaurant. It was small, just 6 tables and a counter. But it was ours. We painted it ourselves. Hung lights from the ceiling. Picked out the tile. Argued over where to put the condiments. Laughed when we both got food poisoning from trying to make a new house salsa that ended up being 90% habanero. That little place took off. Word spread. The town was hungry for something new, and we gave it to them with full plates and full hearts. By the time I turned 30, we had 4 restaurants. All local. All thriving. We weren't millionaires, but we were comfortable, more than comfortable. And every single thing we had, we earned with calloused hands and late nights and 2 tired bodies that still managed to find each other under the same roof, night after night. People looked at us and saw a team. And they weren't wrong. Mandy handled all the finances by then. I was the heart. She was the spine. The business was in her name and mine. The books, the payroll, the taxes, she had it all down to a science. I didn't ask questions because I didn't have to. I trusted her. I chose her. That's what marriage is, right? Choosing someone, Every day, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. And life was hard sometimes. The pressure, the long hours, the weight of being the couple who made it. But we bore it like a badge of honor. We hosted Thanksgiving for our staff. Donated food to the local shelter. Sponsored the Little League team. Everyone in town knew who we were. And they liked us. Looking back now, it's hard not to get stuck in those memories. The good ones. The real ones. Because they were real, at least to me. I can still see her across the kitchen, barefoot, swaying to some 90s pop song while stirring sauce. I can still hear her laugh echoing off the tile. I can still feel the way her hand found mine under the restaurant table when the first review came in 5 stars. It wasn't perfect, no. But it was ours. It was good. It was honest. Or so I thought. That's the thing about betrayal. It doesn't start loud. It starts quiet. So quiet, you don't even know it's begun. But I'll get to that. In time. Right now, I just want you to see what I lost, not in dollars or property or some courtroom settlement. But in her. In who I thought she was. In who we were. Because before everything went to hell, we had something beautiful. And that's what makes the fall so damn hard. You don't notice the cracks when you're living inside the walls. That's the first thing I learned. The second thing? Sometimes love doesn't leave all at once, it drifts out the back door in small pieces, quiet as dust. The thing is, we were still good, or at least I thought we were. Life was busy, sure, but it was the kind of busy we'd always wanted. Success had a rhythm to it. Prep at 5, inventory by 7, meetings at noon, fire up the grill for dinner rush, kiss goodnight, rinse and repeat. I ran the kitchens. Mandy ran the numbers. That's how we kept the machine moving. We were in sync, a little tired, maybe, but still tethered to the same goal. Or at least, that's what I told myself. Now, I can look back and spot the shifts. They were small at first, stuff you'd never think twice about unless you were really paying attention. But I wasn't. I was too busy keeping the doors open and the lights on. Take her phone, for example. Mandy never used to guard it. She'd leave it on the counter, screen up, the way people do when they've got nothing to hide. But at some point, maybe a year before the truth came out, she started keeping it face down. Said the new screen was too sensitive. I believed her. Why wouldn't I? Or the way she started dressing when she went to vendor meetings. A little more effort. A new jacket here, a tighter dress there. I figured she just wanted to look professional. She was a beautiful woman, still is, truth be told, and she knew how to carry herself. It didn't seem strange, not really. Then there were the late nights. She used to stay in with me after close. We'd clean up, count out the till, talk through next week's menu over takeout and cheap wine. But she started heading home early, saying she needed to look at some numbers or was wiped out. I chalked it up to exhaustion, the kind only restaurant life can give you. God knows I was tired too. We were still sleeping in the same bed. Still laughing at dumb shows we'd seen 100 times. Still talking about buying that land outside town, the one with the old oak tree and the wraparound porch we dreamed of building. We even looked at blueprints. But the feeling changed. It's hard to explain. It was like, I don't know. Like she was still there, but not with me. Some nights, I'd wake up and feel the space between us in the dark. She'd be turned the other way. Phone clutched in her hand. That wasn't how it used to be. Mandy used to fall asleep with her head on my chest. Her hand curled on my shoulder. Like I was her anchor in the middle of everything. But little by little, that changed. And I, blind, proud fool that I was, just thought it was stress. Restaurants are hard. Marriage is hard. We'd been running at full speed for years. I thought maybe we just needed a break. A vacation. A chance to breathe. I started making plans for that. A weekend away. Just the two of us. Somewhere quiet, near the water. She smiled when I brought it up, said, "We'll find the time soon, babe." But we never did. Because time was something she had already started spending elsewhere. Back then, I didn't know that a new chef had been hired at one of our locations, the one on the outskirts of town. I trusted Mandy with hiring. She said we needed someone fresh, someone with modern flair. I barely looked at the resume. Just said, if you think he's good, bring him on. His name was Jace. 26. Former culinary school grad with a mop of dark hair and tattoos he probably thought made him look interesting. I met him once. Quick handshake. Didn't think twice about it. He was polite. Called me sir, which made me feel old, but I let it slide. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that Mandy had met him before she ever handed me his resume. I'd learned that detail much, much later. But back then, I was just trying to keep the freezer stocked and the payroll on time. I didn't see it coming. Not even a flicker of it. Because when you love someone, you assume they're right beside you. Even when they've already started drifting away. Looking back, there's this one memory that always sticks out. We were having dinner in the back office one night, not at a restaurant, just at home. Leftover risotto. 2 glasses of wine. She was scrolling through her phone, smiling at something. I asked her what it was. She said, just a funny meme, I'll show you later. She never did. Instead, she leaned over, kissed my cheek, and said, you know, I'm proud of you. You built all this. I remember smiling. Tired, but warm. I said, we built it. And she nodded. But for a split second, just one, her smile didn't reach her eyes. I should have seen it. But I didn't. I've always said I'm not a numbers guy. Never was. Give me a hot grill and a packed dinner rush and I'm in my element. But ask me to balance a ledger? No thanks. That was Mandy's world, spreadsheets, bank statements, supplier payments, all neatly stacked in color-coded folders with notes written in her neat, loopy handwriting. That's why it took me so long to notice. See, when you trust someone completely, you don't double-check them. You don't hover over their shoulder. You don't count receipts after they've already done the math. But one slow Tuesday afternoon, something didn't sit right. I was at the restaurant on Maple, the second one we ever opened. We were going over inventory for a menu change and I asked for the last 3 months of profit reports. Our manager, Jamie, handed them to me without blinking. I flipped through them quick, expecting the usual, steady, reliable, predictable. Except it wasn't. Sales were strong. Orders were coming in. Tables were full every weekend. But somehow the profit margins were down, way down. Too far down for what I knew we were bringing in. I stared at the page for a long time. Ran the numbers twice. Then a third time. Finally, I called Mandy. Hey, I said, trying to keep it casual. You notice Maple's numbers are looking off? She didn't skip a beat. Yeah, labor costs went up, remember? We hired more part-timers to cover the evening shifts. And the new wine list cost more upfront. It'll bounce back. Made sense. Sort of. Enough that I let it go. For about a week. But then I checked another location, the one across from the park. Same story. Good traffic. Strong reviews. Lousy profit. I asked again. Mandy told me it was a seasonal slump. Said food costs were higher due to inflation. Shrugged it off with a smile like it was nothing. And maybe it was nothing. For all I knew, she was right. I wanted her to be right. But that's the first time I felt it. That itch? The whisper in the back of my head that said, check again. Still, I didn't dig too deep. I mean, this was Mandy. My wife. The woman who used to wake up at 4 a.m. to help me hand-roll tamales because the prep cook called out. The same woman who once drove across the county just to find a specific brand of peppers because she knew I liked the way they charred. She wouldn't steal from me. From us. That wasn't her. Right? And yet. One night, I stayed up late after closing. Just me, my laptop, and a stomach full of doubt. I pulled up the shared financials for all 4 restaurants. Everything looked fine on the surface. Nothing glaring. Nothing illegal. But I noticed that certain transfers, ones I hadn't authorized, were popping up more often. Small amounts at first. A few hundred here. 1,000 there. Marketing expenses. Consulting fees. Freelancer contracts. But there were no invoices attached. The accounts payable folder had gaps. Missing files. Nothing huge. But enough to raise a red flag if you were paying attention. So I started paying attention. Next morning, I asked Mandy if she'd switched software. Played dumb. Just curious, I said. She smiled, kissed my cheek, and said, oh, I'm just reorganizing a few things. Cleaning house. I smiled back. But that was the first time I didn't believe her. That night, I couldn't sleep. Kept tossing and turning, staring at the ceiling fan as it spun in slow, hypnotic circles. Mandy was curled up next to me, breathing steady. Peaceful. Like someone without a single worry. And me? I felt like I was underwater. Like I was watching my life through thick glass and something wasn't right on the other side. That weekend, I drove out to the edge of town location. The newest one, the one Mandy had been visiting more often lately. She'd said she was training staff. Helping the new chef settle in. Jace. The young guy with the Instagram-style plating and slick confidence. I hadn't really talked to him since he was hired. So I figured I'd stop by. Just to check on the fryer. That's what I told myself anyway. When I pulled into the back lot, the place was quiet. Mid-afternoon lull. I walked in through the kitchen. A few line cooks were prepping. Nothing unusual. I shook hands, made small talk, checked the fryers like I said I would. But as I turned to leave, I caught something odd out of the corner of my eye. Jace's backpack, sitting open by the staff lockers. Inside, poking out just enough, was a printed pay stub. Not from our system. from somewhere else. Curiosity got the better of me. I leaned closer. It was a deposit slip, actually, made out to Jace. But the account it came from? It wasn't our business account. It wasn't any of our accounts. It was personal. And the name on the top right corner? Mandy. I stood there for a long second, staring at the slip like it might start explaining itself. Then I walked out. Didn't say a word. Didn't confront her that night. Didn't throw accusations or demand answers. I just sat at the kitchen table long after she'd gone to bed, my laptop open in front of me, trying to remember exactly when my marriage started feeling like a shell with pretty wallpaper. And that whisper in the back of my mind? It wasn't whispering anymore. It was screaming. It's strange how you can live beside someone, share a bed, a business, a future, and still feel completely alone. That's where I was. Still in it but not in it. You know? The weird thing is, nothing had blown up yet. No big fights. No yelling. No bags packed by the door. We still kissed goodbye in the morning. Still ate dinner together when we could. To the outside world, we were solid. But inside, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was looking at her through a window instead of across the table. And when you start feeling like that, you don't sleep much. I'd wake up at 3:17 for 02, for 19, never the same time twice, just always early. Mandy would be curled beside me, perfectly still, and I'd stare at the ceiling, counting slow seconds like they owed me an explanation. So I did what you do when you're trying not to lose your mind. I started checking. Not snooping. Not at first. Just looking. I pulled old bank records. Nothing too deep, just our shared accounts. I told myself I was looking for errors, maybe trying to find where we'd overspent. But then I started noticing patterns. Small withdrawals every other Friday. Always under 1,000. Always labeled external transfer. Not to our savings. Not to payroll. And not once did she mention them. Then there was the new laptop. She said she needed it for better accounting software. I believed her, but the passwords changed. The folders I used to be able to click through? Gone. Locked down. She said it was security updates. But the way she said it, the tight smile, the quick subject change, didn't sit right. So I did the one thing I hadn't done since we opened our first spot. I showed up unannounced. Restaurant on the edge of town. Tuesday evening. I told her I had to drop off some replacement burners and check on a new fryer. Totally believable. I even brought the parts in the back of the truck, just in case she asked. I pulled into the lot around 7:45. That place always had a quiet buzz. Not packed like downtown, but steady. Especially for weeknights. Families, couples. Good energy. But that night, something felt different the second I stepped through the back. Staff was polite, but cagey. Jace gave me a quick nod. The kind you give your boss when you don't want to talk. And Mandy? She wasn't there. I asked the hostess where the manager was. Oh, Mandy's out front. She's having dinner with a guest. Guest? She nodded. Yeah, they've been here a while. That's when I felt it. The first real crack. Right down my chest. I walked out into the dining area. Casually, like I was just stretching my legs. And there she was. In a booth by the window, tucked into the corner. Laughing. Hair curled just right. Glass of wine in her hand. Across from her, Jace, leaning forward, smiling. His hand on the table inches from hers. I stopped. I didn't walk over. I didn't make a scene. I just watched for a few seconds. Long enough to see something no husband should ever see in his wife's eyes. That look. The one she used to give me when we were building all this. It was like watching a memory with someone else's face. I backed away, quiet, slipped out the back and sat in my truck. Hands on the steering wheel, knuckles white. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there. For a long, long time. And in that silence, 1,000 things rushed in. Not just what I saw, but everything leading up to it. The passwords. The missing money. The sudden meetings. The guarded phone. The kiss that felt just a little more distant than it used to. It all clicked. And that man I used to be, the one who trusted her without hesitation, who believed in her more than he believed in himself sometimes, he cracked a little more. But still, even then, I told myself maybe it wasn't what it looked like. Maybe it was business. Maybe I was overthinking. That's the part that gets me the most, how badly I wanted to be wrong. Some things in life hit you slow, like rust creeping in. You don't see it until it's already eaten through the metal. Other times, it hits like a door slamming in your face. That night, it was both. I wasn't planning to stop by the restaurant on the edge of town. Funny how that place kept coming up. But one of the vendors had called about a missing shipment of produce, said he dropped it off that morning and no one signed for it. So I figured I'd swing by, check in, take a look at the books, calm my nerves. I had this small, stubborn hope in my chest that maybe I'd walk in, find nothing strange, and be able to tell myself I'd imagined the whole thing. It was around 8:20 p.m. when I parked in the back. From the lot, I could already see the back kitchen was empty. No movement, just dim overhead lights. For a Friday night, it was unusually quiet. Not dead, just muted. I walked in through the side entrance. No one saw me. I didn't announce myself. I didn't have to. This was my place. Every inch of it was built with my own 2 hands, the tile, the fixtures, even the menu board I carved from salvaged wood. I knew this place better than my own living room. I took a breath, rounded the corner toward the front, and that's when it happened. The sound. Not loud. Just unmistakable. A laugh. Hers. Soft. Drunk with comfort. That version of Mandy that came out when she was completely at ease. It stopped me cold. Then I heard his voice. Jace. Low. Confident. Like someone who believed he belonged wherever he sat. I moved closer. Not like a man on a mission, more like someone drifting, slow and heavy, toward a moment he already knows will hurt. There's a small hallway behind the front dining room. Leads to the supply closet and a service entrance. I took it. From there, I could see them. Not just sitting across from each other like they had the other night. Not just sharing wine and whispers. They were on the same side of the booth. Her legs draped over his hand on her thigh. And her face? Smiling. Like she'd never smiled at me. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just stood there, staring at a life I no longer recognized. I didn't make a sound, not even when she leaned in and kissed him. Not a peck. Not something that could be passed off as nothing. No. This was different. Familiar. Rehearsed. This wasn't new. This had been happening for a while. I don't remember walking out. I only remember sitting in my truck with the engine running, hands gripping the wheel like it was the only thing keeping me tethered to reality. There's no guidebook for that kind of moment. No script. No right thing to say. Because it's not just about the kiss. It's not just about the affair. It's about everything that came before it, the years, the sacrifices, the little wins, the dreams shared over late-night takeout. All of it crumbling in your hands like dry leaves. I don't know how long I sat there. Eventually, I drove home. Quiet. Numb. Not angry yet, just hollow. Mandy got home after midnight. I was still up, sitting in the dark, drink untouched on the table. She walked in humming, dropped her purse on the counter like she had no weight in the world. I didn't say anything. I didn't ask. She kissed my head from behind and whispered, "Long day, huh?" I just nodded. She went to bed. Slept like nothing had changed. But for me, everything had. There's a moment right after the shock fades where things go still. Not peaceful still, more like the quiet that settles in a room after the last person leaves and the lights get turned off. That was me sitting in that silence. For 2 days after I saw Mandy and Jace, I didn't say a word. Not to her. Not to friends. Not to family. Just went through the motions, got up, showered, made coffee, checked on the restaurants. I answered texts. Nodded in meetings. Smiled when I had to. And all the while, there was a roaring in my head so loud I could barely hear my own thoughts. Because now I knew. No more guessing. No more gut feelings. No more mental gymnastics trying to justify things that didn't make sense. She was cheating. And it wasn't some heat of the moment, drunken mistake. It was a whole thing. Familiar, comfortable. Worn in like an old pair of jeans. She hadn't just betrayed me, she'd settled into it. But here's the thing, I wasn't looking for revenge. I wasn't about to torch the restaurants or show up at the guy's place with a baseball bat. I just wanted to understand. I needed to see how far it went. What she'd taken from me. From us. Because it wasn't just her heart that had drifted, it was our money, our future, our name. So I started digging. Quietly. Carefully. First, I looked through the financial folders we'd both had access to when we started the business. Most were moved now, tucked into cloud drives with her private logins. But a few backup files were still on an old hard drive I kept in my desk. That's where I found the first smoking gun. Transfers. Steady, regular. From our restaurant accounts to a personal account I didn't recognize. Not in her name, either. It was under an LLC I'd never heard of, Northbrook Culinary Services. Sounded official. Professional. But we had no vendor by that name. No invoices. No services listed. And yet thousands had gone there. I checked the bank code. It was tied to a local branch one Mandy had opened when we first got married, back when we each had our just-in-case accounts. Hers had always been smaller. Emergency savings. Nothing big. Except now it was holding close to $90,000. I stared at the screen, blinking. That's when I knew this wasn't just an affair. This was a heist. She wasn't cheating on me. She was robbing me. And she wasn't doing it alone. So I did what any sane man with a sinking gut would do. I hired help. A friend of mine, Calvin, used to do contract IT work for us. Smart guy. Quiet. Loyal. I called him up, told him I was dealing with something sensitive and I needed eyes on our accounts. Didn't have to say more. He knew me well enough to take the job. Within a few days, I had a full rundown. She'd been moving money for almost a year. Just enough to fly under the radar. Jace's name wasn't on anything, but guess who got hired as a private contractor 6 months ago under a different LLC Mandy had registered? Bright Fork Hospitality. One guess who ran the kitchen consulting? Yep. Jace. She'd been paying him from our profits. Masking it as outside training and chef development. Nobody questioned it because the numbers were disguised to look like employee development and most restaurant owners do bring in freelancers sometimes. Except this one was sharing her bed. And as I stared at the financial trail, one fake expense after another, one paper-thin excuse after the next, the most bitter part wasn't even the betrayal. It was the fact that she used our dream to fund her secret life. My money. My name. The business I broke my back for. She was draining it one lie at a time. And she smiled in my face every night while doing it. But that was fine. Because now I knew everything I needed to know. And the man she thought would sit quietly and accept it? Yeah. He was gone. There's a strange kind of peace that comes after the worst has already happened. You don't have to wonder anymore. Don't have to lie to yourself or wrestle with maybe I'm wrong at 2 in the morning. Once the truth's out, the air clears and all that's left is what you're gonna do about it. And me? I'd made my choice. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to beg. I was going to rebuild with her out of the picture. But first, I had to be smart. I met with a lawyer. A good one, the kind that doesn't advertise on bus benches. Guy came recommended by another local business owner who'd been through a messy divorce of his own. We sat down in his office with paneling, no nonsense. He listened. Didn't interrupt much. Just nodded and asked a few quiet questions while I laid everything out. The affair. The shell companies. The stolen money. He leaned back when I was done and said something I'll never forget. You've got the upper hand, Roberto, for now. But don't let her know it. Not yet. He was right. See, Mandy was smart. Cunning. The kind of woman who could smile during a storm and have everyone believe it was sunny. If she knew I was building a case, she'd hide the rest of her tracks, or worse, burn everything down before I had a chance to save it. So we played it quiet. The lawyer filed the paperwork to freeze the accounts. Not all of them, just enough to slow the bleeding. We began organizing the proof, bank statements, transfers, internal documents, emails she didn't know I had access to. We even subpoenaed the LLCs and traced the money trail back to Jace. Everything was coming together. In the meantime, I kept playing the part. The doting husband. The hard-working partner. I made breakfast. Took phone calls. Kissed her on the cheek like nothing had changed. She bought it. She'd come home late, offer vague excuses, tell me about some new supplier she was vetting. I'd nod. Pretend to be tired. Go back to reviewing the paper trail in my office while she showered off someone else's cologne. That's the part I'll never quite understand, how easy it was for her. How she could lie with her mouth full of my cooking. There was one night in particular, about a week before the legal hammer dropped, that sticks with me. We were eating takeout on the couch. She was in sweatpants, feet tucked under her, talking about a new seasonal menu for one of the restaurants. Acting like nothing was wrong. Like we still shared the same dream. And I just sat there, chewing slowly, nodding like a man still in love. But the whole time, I was thinking, you're sitting in a house I built. Eating food I paid for, wearing comfort bought with my name. And you think I don't know? I did. I knew everything. And I was counting the minutes. Then the day came. She was out running errands. Likely having lunch with him. When the process server handed her the envelope. Divorce papers. Financial fraud notice. Formal separation of business interests. All of it. Every page laid out what I'd discovered. what I was taking, what I was leaving. By the time she got home, I was waiting, calm, dressed like I was going to church, not war. She walked in, holding the envelope like it was radioactive. "You knew?" she asked, like the question actually mattered. I nodded once. "For how long?" I shrugged. "Long enough to stop loving you." That hit her. Not because she didn't expect consequences, but because she finally realized the version of me she'd known wasn't coming back. Not this time. She tried to talk. Spin it. Make excuses. Blame stress. Blame me. Said things like, "We were drifting, and you were always working." Yeah. I was working for us, while she was working an entirely different angle. I let her talk. Let her say her piece. Let her cry those carefully measured tears, the kind that look good in a mirror. Then I handed her a final document. One she hadn't seen yet. Complete buyout offer. I was keeping the original restaurant, the one we started together. The one with my name on the wall. She could have the others. I didn't want them anymore. I didn't want anything she'd touched while she was pretending to still be mine. Her jaw tightened. She asked if I was sure. I said yes. Because sometimes walking away with less is still walking away with more. Your dignity, your freedom, your peace. That night, she packed a bag. Didn't say goodbye. Didn't look back. And just like that, the chapter closed. But the story wasn't over yet. You'd think after she walked out that front door, suitcase in hand, eyes dry as desert stone, it'd feel like an ending. Spoiler, it didn't. The house was quieter, sure. Cleaner, even. No half-finished coffee cups on the bathroom counter. No trail of receipts and makeup bags across the kitchen table. But there was no peace. Just space. And space, I've learned, doesn't always feel like freedom. Sometimes it feels like a wound you can't reach. That first week without her, I moved like a man underwater. Still opened the restaurants, still made payroll, still returned vendor calls. Folks in town said I looked tired. I just nodded. Tired was easier than burned down to the bone. And of course, she didn't go quiet. Mandy wasn't the kind of person to lose with grace. Not once money and image were on the line. The morning after she got served, I walked into my lawyer's office and saw his assistant already printing out emails. Mandy had hired her own legal team, loud, expensive, and full of the kind of language that makes you feel like you're the problem. They claimed I manipulated her into signing the business over. That she was emotionally compromised. That I used coercion, guilt, and psychological pressure to take advantage of her fragile state. Fragile. The same woman who cooked the books for a year and paid her boyfriend out of our shared profits. Fragile, my foot. But I didn't flinch. That's what they wanted, for me to get riled up, to react. But I'd already lost too much to let pride do the steering. Instead, I got smarter. We submitted our own evidence, the money trail, the fabricated vendors, the timestamps, the phone records, and yes, even a few carefully chosen surveillance stills. Nothing scandalous. Nothing inappropriate. Just enough. A hand on her leg at a work dinner. A closed-door meeting that lasted hours when she was supposedly off-site. A deposit made from a restaurant's account into a shell company that no longer existed. The court didn't need fireworks. They just needed the truth in black and white. And that's exactly what I gave them. But what I didn't see coming was how low she'd sink once it was clear she was losing. It started with the restaurants. She tried to claim intellectual property. Said the menu was her idea, the name was hers, the branding hers. My lawyer asked the court to review the original sketches. My notebooks, emails, the literal napkin from 7 years ago with our first logo drawn in pen. She lost that round. Then she claimed the new chef, Jace, was being unfairly harassed. That I was targeting him with a coordinated smear campaign meant to destroy his reputation. That one made me laugh out loud. Only thing I ever targeted Jace with was silence. And a final paycheck. Turns out, when you use company funds to bankroll your affair and lie about your qualifications, you don't get to keep your apron. He didn't last long after Mandy left. Once the spotlight turned on him, he folded. Quietly took a job in another town, changed his number. Last I heard, he was working at a country club kitchen out near the lake. Good riddance. But Mandy wasn't done. She filed a motion to freeze my remaining business assets. Claimed she was owed half of everything, the land, the trucks, the restaurant she didn't even work in. Said I was liquidating to avoid paying her rightful share. Except I wasn't. Everything was accounted for. Transparent. Clean. I had the books to prove it and a forensic accountant to back it up. She lost that round too. The judge was starting to see the pattern. So was everyone else. And that's when the public mask started to crack. Mandy used to be the golden girl of our town. The sweetheart who supported her husband's dream, the businesswoman with charm and poise. But once people saw what she'd done, heard about the theft, the affair, the lawsuits, that shine wore off fast. Some folks took her side. That's life. People believe what they want to believe. But the people that mattered? They saw the truth. My staff stood by me. Not all of them, but enough. The ones who knew how this all started, the nights we cleaned grease traps by hand, the mornings we built menus on index cards. My family rallied too. My older sister moved in for a bit, made sure I ate more than black coffee and vending machine peanuts. My dad, who rarely meddled, called every other day just to say, "You good?" And me? I kept my head down. Kept working. I reopened the original restaurant under a slightly new name. Nothing flashy. Just mine. Honest. Simple. And people came back. Regulars, new faces, folks who didn't care about the headlines, just wanted a good meal made by someone who still gave a damn. That first night we reopened, I stood in the back and watched a young couple split a plate of enchiladas and laugh like they had no worries in the world. That's when it hit me. This place? It survived. I survived. Mandy took a lot. But she didn't take me. And now she never would again. Even after the final court date, she tried to stir up one last mess. Claimed emotional damages. Said the whole process had left her with stress-induced migraines, anxiety, loss of sleep. She wanted compensation. The judge dismissed it in less than 10 minutes. That was the day I finally breathed. Deep. Long full. Not because the fight was over, but because I remembered who I was. And that, my friend, was more than enough. The funny thing about rebuilding is that it doesn't come with fireworks. There's no moment where a trumpet sounds and you declare, "I'm healed now." It comes in quiet ways. Simple ones. The kind of peace that sneaks in through the cracks while you're wiping down a countertop or drinking coffee before the sun comes up. That's where I found myself a few months after the court papers were signed and Mandy officially became part of my past. Not with some grand new life, but with small routines that started to feel steady again. Safe. The restaurant was doing all right. We weren't breaking records, but the seats stayed warm and the kitchen stayed busy. The crew I kept on were loyal, and even the new hires caught on quick. We had a rhythm. And in that rhythm I started finding parts of myself I hadn't seen in a long time. One morning I opened the place early. No one else there yet. Just me and the hum of the fridge compressors and the faint rattle of pans settling from the night before. I stood in the middle of the kitchen, hands on my hips, took a breath, and for the first time in what felt like years, I wasn't carrying weight I couldn't name. That's what healing looks like. Not some Instagram quote or a beach trip. Just a man standing in a kitchen realizing he can breathe again. I started fixing up the old house too. The one we bought together but never really made into a home. I didn't rip everything out or try to make it brand new. I just made it mine. Repainted the walls. Swapped out some furniture. Donated the stuff that reminded me of her. I kept a few things, but only the pieces that held memories worth keeping. Funny thing, the space started to feel bigger without her. Not because it was emptier, but because it was honest. I saw Mandy once in town. Briefly. At the farmer's market. She didn't see me, or if she did, she pretended not to. She looked tired. Polished, still trying to keep up appearances, but there was something hollow in her walk. Like someone going through motions she didn't believe in anymore. And I didn't feel anger. Not anymore. Just distance. I think that's the real end of love, not rage, not grief, but indifference. When you can look at someone who once held your world and feel nothing more than a quiet thank you for the lessons. And then you move on. And move on I did. I started spending more time at the local rec center. Got roped into coaching a youth cooking class. At first it felt strange, me standing there teaching kids how to chop onions without crying, but they warmed up fast. One of them, a kid named Milo, told me he wanted to open a food truck one day. I smiled. Told him it's not glamorous, but it's real. That was the first time I told someone new about the old days. About how I started with nothing but a grill, a busted trailer, and a woman who used to believe in me. I didn't tell him the ending. Just the beginning. Because sometimes the ending doesn't matter as much when you know who you are now. I won't lie to you and say I don't think about Mandy anymore. I do. Sometimes. When certain songs come on the radio or I pass a dish she used to love. But it's like hearing a story someone else told you once. Familiar, but no longer mine. Peace, it turns out, isn't a finish line. It's a place you build. Brick by brick. Choice by choice. Morning by morning. And me? I'm building slow. But solid. And for the first time in a long time. It's enough. Life doesn't come with clean endings. It just keeps going. One day becomes another. The sun rises whether your heart is whole or cracked down the middle. And at some point, you stop waiting for some final moment of closure and start making peace with what is. That's where I am now. It's been just over a year since the day I watched Mandy walk away. A year of rebuilding. Of relearning. Of rediscovering the things I loved before everything got twisted up in betrayal and silence. The restaurant's doing better than ever. We added a patio. Folks like sitting out there in the evenings sipping something cold and watching the town wind down. On weekends, there's live music. Nothing fancy, just a guy with a guitar or a piano player who knows how to read a room. I keep the lights a little dimmer now. Not because I'm hiding anything. Just feels cozier. Warmer. Like a place where people want to stay. And I guess that's all I ever wanted. To build something people wanted to be part of. To make folks feel welcome. Full. At peace. That dream hasn't changed. I've started writing down the story. Not just what happened with Mandy, though that part's in there, but the whole thing. The grind. The food truck days. The burnouts and the breakthroughs. The people who helped and the ones who tried to take it all. Some days I think it'll end up as a book. Other days I think I'll just leave it on a shelf for my future kids or nephews to read so they know the truth about love, loss, and the grit it takes to come back from nothing. Because if there's one thing I've learned through all this, it's that coming back isn't about revenge. It's about resilience. It's about refusing to be defined by what broke you. And look, I'm not some kind of saint. I got angry. I cursed at the walls. I sat in the driveway some nights with the truck off and the keys still in my hand, wondering how it all went so wrong. But I never let that be the last chapter. I chose to get up. Not out of pride. But because I still had something to build. A life worth living. A name worth keeping. And wouldn't you know it? That name still means something. Folks still come by the restaurant and ask if I'm around. Not because they want gossip. But because they remember. The old truck. The tacos. The man who used to run the grill in a sweat-stained shirt and dream bigger than his paycheck. Some dreams fade. Others evolve. These days, mine are simpler. I want a quiet morning. A full restaurant. A life where I can look in the mirror and recognize the man staring back. And maybe one day someone new will sit across from me, not because I need them to fix anything, but because I've already done the fixing. On my own. That kind of love? If it shows up again, I'll be ready. But I'm not chasing it. Right now, I'm here. Right where I belong. And for the first time in a long, long time. I'm good.